Persephone explained, the spring goddess who became queen of the dead. In the grand tapestry of existence, there are threads of light and threads of shadow. There is the vibrant, sun-drenched warmth of life, and the silent, solemn coolness of death. We often see these as opposing forces, locked in an eternal, irreconcilable conflict. But what if they are not opposites? What if they are two faces of the same coin, two movements in the same cosmic symphony? In the heart of ancient Greek mythology lies a figure who embodies this profound paradox. A goddess whose story is not one of simple tragedy but of sublime transformation. She is the daughter of the harvest, the very essence of spring, whose laughter could make flowers bloom. And yet, she is also the dread queen of the underworld, the silent sovereign of the departed, whose gaze holds the wisdom of eternity. This is the story of Persephone. To understand her is to understand the cyclical nature of our world, the promise of rebirth that lies dormant within every winter, the shadow that gives sunlight its meaning. Hers is a journey from innocence to power, from a sunlit field to a subterranean throne. It is the story of a goddess who was taken into darkness, only to emerge as its master. Join us as we descend into the depths of myth and memory to explain the tale of Persephone, the queen of the dead who, against all odds, embodied life itself. Before the shadow fell, before the world learned the language of grief, there was an age of brilliant, untroubled gold. An age ruled from a mountain peak, where the Olympian gods, eternal in their power and tempestuous in their passions, governed the cosmos. The sky belonged to Zeus, thundering and sovereign. The boundless seas answered to Poseidon, moody and magnificent. But the earth itself, the very soil from which all life springs, belonged to Demeter. She was the great mother, the font of all nourishment, the goddess of the sacred harvest. Demeter was not a deity of abstract concepts. Her power was tangible, felt in the turning of the seasons, tasted in the sweetness of the fruit, and seen in the endless fields of wheat that swayed like a golden ocean under the sun. Her will was the difference between feast and famine, life and dust. When she was content, the world flourished in a symphony of abundance. The scent of rain on dry earth, the weight of a ripe apple in the hand, the miracle of a single seed becoming a stalk of grain, all of this was the expression of her benevolent soul. She was the unwavering heartbeat of the living world. And the center of her world, the source of all her divine joy, was her daughter. She was not yet Persephone, the dread queen whose name would one day be spoken in hushed whispers. In these sun-drenched days she had another name, a name that sounded like the sigh of a gentle breeze through new leaves. She was Kore, the maiden. Kore was the living embodiment of spring's promise. Born of Demeter's union with the mighty Zeus, she was innocence given form, joy made manifest. To see her was to witness creation in its most pristine state. Her hair, the color of sun-bleached honey, was a constant crown of fresh blossoms, daffodils, violets, and wild hyacinths that she wove into it each morning. Her eyes held the clear, untroubled blue of a summer sky. Her laughter was not merely a sound, it was a force of nature, a melody that could coax shy buds from their slumber and make the streams run clearer. Her days were spent in a state of perfect, blissful freedom, yet within a world carefully curated by her mother. Her companions were the Oceanids, the 3,000 ethereal daughters of the Titan Oceanus. They were nymphs of the water and fields, creatures of pure light and song. Together they would dance in the meadows, their feet barely touching the ground. They would sing to the birds and race the butterflies, their games a portrait of untainted happiness, far removed from the political machinations and dark ambitions that so often consumed the gods on Olympus. This idyllic existence was Demeter's masterpiece. She loved her daughter with a fierce, profound, and all-consuming devotion. But this love was also a fortress. Demeter sought to preserve Kore's innocence as one might protect a flawless pearl, shielding her from every harsh wind, every encroaching shadow. In the goddess's mind, Kore was to remain forever the maiden, a symbol of unspoiled life, forever dancing in a sunlit field that knew no winter. She was a pristine, secret garden, and Demeter was its unyielding, ever-watchful wall. But a perfect world can create a dangerous naivety. And no wall, not even one built by a goddess, can keep out a gaze powerful enough to see through the very rock and soil of the earth. Far beneath the world of light, in a realm untouched by the faintest glimmer of sun, lay another kingdom. A vast, silent, and majestic domain. The underworld. This was not a pit of fire and torment as later fates would imagine it. It was a place of immense hidden wealth. Veins of gold, silver, and bronze snaked through its rock. Clusters of uncut diamonds and raw gems glittered in the eternal twilight, their beauty seen by no mortal eye. It was the kingdom of the final, solemn truth of existence, the destination for every soul hero and farmer, king and slave after their thread of life had been cut. It was a land of mist and memory of profound, unending quiet. And its king was Hades. Brother to Zeus and Poseidon, Hades was the eldest son of the Titans Cronus and Rhea. When the three brothers had cast lots to divide the cosmos, Zeus had drawn the heavens, Poseidon the seas, and Hades, the vast and gloomy expanse below. He was the lord of the dead, a grim, solitary, and immensely powerful figure. The Greeks did not consider him evil, that was a later corruption. He was, instead, inexorable. He was the god of finality, of the wealth hidden in the earth, and of the unyielding laws that govern the end of life. His throne was carved from a single piece of polished ebony, set in a cavernous hall where the only sound was the distant, sorrowful murmur of the river Styx. He was a king who ruled over a population of billions, the sum total of all who had ever lived, yet he was utterly alone. No laughter echoed in his halls. No companion sat by his side to share the weight of his eternal, lonely vigil. From his silent throne, the Lord of the Dead would sometimes gaze upwards, his otherworldly senses perceiving the vibrant, chaotic world of life above. And it was during one such moment of contemplation that he saw her. He saw Kore. He saw the untainted joy, the effortless grace, the radiant, life-affirming beauty that was so profoundly absent in his own domain. And in the ancient, silent heart of the god of the dead, a longing began to stir. It was a desire as deep and powerful as the earth itself. He, the master of all that ended, found himself yearning for the very embodiment of all that begins. He wanted not just a consort but a counterpart. He wanted the light to come and dwell in his darkness. Hades was a king, and kings do not beg. But he was also a pragmatist. He knew that Demeter would sooner see the world starve than allow her daughter, the sun-kissed maiden, to be wed to the king of shadows. Such a union was unthinkable to the Great Mother. So Hades did what powerful brothers do. He bypassed the mother and went directly to the father. He ascended from his realm, a rare journey, and sought an audience with Zeus on Mount Olympus. There amidst the clouds and splendor, the Lord of the Dead laid out his proposal to the king of the gods. He did not speak of love or longing but of alliance and power. A marriage between his house and the line of Zeus would cement the rule of the three brothers, creating an unbreakable bond that spanned all three realms of the cosmos. Zeus, the ultimate political strategist, saw the logic immediately. He weighed the happiness of one daughter against the stability of his entire reign. For the king of Olympus, the choice was cold, clear, and simple. He gave his consent. In a secret pact, a conspiracy of kings that would shatter the world's heart, Zeus, the Allfather, promised his own child to the lord of the underworld. Not a word was spoken to Demeter. Not a whisper of this dark arrangement reached the ears of the innocent Kore. And so the stage was set. The fate of the maiden was sealed, not by a monster's malice alone, but by the profound loneliness of one god and the cold, cosmic pragmatism of another. Above, the sun continued to shine its golden blessing upon the meadow. The nymphs continued to sing. But deep beneath the fragrant soil, unseen and unfelt, a crack was beginning to form. A chasm was preparing to open, waiting for the perfect moment to swallow the spring. The word the ancient Greeks used was harpagmos. It translates simply as the abduction, the seizure. But this gentle term belies the savage truth of the act. Later ages, seeking a word that could hold the full weight of the terror and the violation, would call it the rape of Persephone. For this was not a seduction, nor an elopement. It was a theft of cosmic proportions. A violent rending of innocence from the world, a brutal tearing of a daughter from her mother, and a deep wound inflicted upon the sacred order of nature itself. It was an act of darkness committed in the full light of the sun. The day of the tragedy began like any other in the sheltered paradise of Kore. She and her companions, the graceful Oceanids, were in the mythical fields of Nyssa, a place so fertile it was said to have nursed the god Dionysus himself. The air was warm and smelled of honey and damp earth. The sky was a perfect, unbroken dome of azure blue. They were gathering flowers, asphodel and crocus, violet and iris, their laughter weaving through the air like silver threads, a sound of pure, untroubled joy. Kore, ever the heart of their games, moved with a grace that made the very flowers seem to turn their heads towards her. But this was no ordinary day. A divine conspiracy was in motion. Hades was not a god of brute force alone, he was a king of strategy, and he had an accomplice. Acting upon the secret decree of Zeus, Gaia, the primordial earth mother herself, the ancient ground upon which Kore danced, was made complicit in the betrayal. To lure the maiden away from the protective circle of her friends, Gaia performed a terrible miracle. From a single spot of earth, a flower of breathtaking, unholy beauty began to bloom. It was a narcissus, the flower of self-obsession and fatal allure. But this was a bloom of divine artifice. It was not one flower, but a radiant cluster of 100 heads, its petals pearlescent and shimmering, and from it emanated a fragrance so potent, so intoxicatingly sweet, that it overwhelmed all other scents. The perfume was a siren's call, drifting upwards to perfume the wide sky, downwards to saturate the very roots of the world, and outwards to scent the salt spray of the distant sea. The nymphs paused in their play, awestruck. But it was Kore, the daughter of the Earth Mother Demeter, who felt its pull most keenly. It was a flower that seemed created just for her. Drawn by its supernatural beauty and its irresistible scent, she took a step, and then another, moving away from her friends, her eyes fixed on the wondrous bloom. She was mesmerized, enchanted. She reached out her delicate hand, her fingers extending to pluck this impossible prize from the earth. A smile of pure delight was on her lips. She was about to possess the most beautiful flower in all of creation. And in that precise, suspended moment, the world broke. The ground beneath her feet, the solid, dependable earth she had trusted her entire life, split open. A chasm, a gaping dark wound, tore through the green meadow with a terrifying finality. Smoke and the cold, damp smell of sunless soil and decay billowed forth from the abyss. It was a portal to another reality, a raw physical violation of the world of light. From this jagged maw in the earth, a chariot emerged, pulled not by mortal horses, but by 4 immortal stallions, their coats the color of polished jet, their eyes glowing like embers. The chariot itself was wrought of black gold and shadow, a fearsome vessel for a fearsome king. And at the reins, his form cloaked in gloom, his face grim and resolute, was the king of the underworld himself. Hades. There was no time for thought, no chance for escape. Before Kore could even process the horror unfolding before her, Hades swept down from the chariot. His grip was like iron, inescapable. He lifted her from the ground and into the chariot beside him, her feet leaving the living world for the last time as the innocent maiden Kore. The garland of flowers fell from her hair. The bouquet she had gathered scattered across the torn earth, a pathetic, colorful ruin. A scream tore from her throat, a sound of pure, uncomprehending terror. First she cried out for her father, the great Zeus, king of the gods. Father! A desperate, shrill appeal to the highest authority in the cosmos. But the king of the gods, high on his mountain, sat on his throne of power and did nothing. He heard her cry and he ignored it. He was the silent architect of her despair. Her voice then found its most primal target. She screamed for her mother. Mother! It was a cry that carried the weight of all the love and trust that was being shattered. A heartrending shriek of a child being stolen, a sound so filled with anguish that it should have stopped the sun in its tracks. Her cries echoed across the mountains and into the depths of the sea, a sound of such profound violation that nature itself seemed to recoil in fear. The birds fell silent. The wind died. But her nymph companions were frozen in terror, too stunned and powerless to intervene. The golden chariot, with its grim captor and his weeping prize, plunged back into the abyss. The great stallions galloped down into the darkness, back towards the realm of the dead. And then, as suddenly and violently as it had opened, the chasm closed. The earth healed itself, stitching the wound together, leaving no trace of the violence it had committed against its own. The meadow was silent once more. The sun shone on. But the light felt colder, emptier. Kore was gone. Spring had been stolen. The abduction in its shocking speed had been almost invisible. Almost. From her cave at the threshold between worlds, the mysterious goddess Hecate of the crossroads of magic and of the moonless night had not seen the act, but she had heard it. With her keen otherworldly senses, she had caught the maiden's desperate, fading cry as it pierced the veil. And high above in his fiery chariot arcing across the sky, Helios, the all-seeing god of the sun, had seen everything. His gaze misses nothing that happens between the dawn and the dusk. He had been the sole, divine witness to the pact, the lure, and the terrible capture. These two, the witness of the unseen and the witness of the seen, now held the keys to the truth. But for now a profound and terrible silence fell over the world. A silence that would soon be broken by the earth-shattering roar of a mother's grief. When the sun began its descent and Kore did not return from the fields, a small cold seed of fear was planted in Demeter's heart. This was not like her daughter, whose punctuality was as reliable as the dawn. As the sky bled from purple into the deep, starless black of night, that seed of fear began to sprout, its tendrils wrapping around the goddess's soul, chilling her with a mother's primal dread. Her calls of Kore, Kore, echoed into a silent, empty world, answered only by the rustle of leaves that seemed to whisper of absence. The panic that followed was a storm of divine energy. Tearing a dark veil over her radiant hair, a symbol of her dawning grief, Demeter began her search. For 9 days and 9 nights, the great Earth Mother, the font of all life, became a specter of sorrow. She roamed the earth, a flaming torch held high in each hand, their twin fires cutting through the darkness, a desperate, moving beacon in the growing gloom. She was a goddess possessed, her divine purpose forgotten, her entire being consumed by a single, desperate question: where is my child? She did not touch the sweet nectar of the gods. She did not taste the life-giving ambrosia. Sleep offered her no respite. She walked every mountain and valley, every shore and forest, her relentless pace a testament to a love that bordered on madness. And as the goddess of life grieved, the world began to grieve with her. Her sorrow was not a private emotion, it was a cosmic force, a blight that radiated from her very being. The vibrant green of the world began to pale and wash out, as if drained of its color. The leaves on the trees, once lush and supple, grew brittle, curling at the edges before turning a sickly yellow and falling to the ground. Fruits, once plump and bursting with sweetness, shriveled on the vine, their promise turning to dust. The rich, dark soil grew hard and cold, refusing to yield to the plow. Demeter's despair was a poison, and it was leeching the life from everything it touched. On the dawn of the 10th day, her tortured path crossed with another who carried a torch in the darkness. From her cave at the edge of the world emerged Hecate, the enigmatic goddess of witchcraft, crossroads, and the mysteries that lie between night and day. Hecate, her own torches casting an eerie, flickering light, approached the grieving mother. Her voice was not one of pity, but of shared knowledge, like the rustling of dry leaves in a graveyard. "Great Demeter," she said, her gaze steady and knowing. "I heard the cry of your daughter as she was torn away. A sound of violation. But my eyes did not see the thief who took her." Hecate, the guardian of what is hidden, could only point the way towards absolute truth. She guided the desperate mother to the one being whose vantage point was the entire sky, Helios, the god of the sun. Demeter ascended into the heavens, her form no longer radiant but cloaked in the black robes of mourning. She stood before the golden chariot of the sun god, her eyes, once filled with the warmth of the harvest, now burning with the cold fire of a singular, desperate purpose. "Helios," She pleaded, her voice cracking with 9 days of unshed tears. You see all things beneath your gaze, the deeds of gods and the follies of men. Tell me, I beg you, what has become of my child? Has some god or mortal stolen my light? Helios, the all-seeing, could not bear to witness such profound anguish from the goddess who gave his light meaning on earth. He bowed his radiant head and told her the terrible, unvarnished truth. He spoke of the dark pact struck in secret on Olympus. He told her of Hades's lonely desire and Zeus's cold, political calculation. He described the earth opening, the black chariot, the abduction of her daughter into the sunless realm of the underworld. He tried, in his way, to soften the blow, suggesting that Hades, king of the dead and brother of Zeus, was no unworthy husband for a goddess, a ruler of a third of the cosmos. But his words were not comfort, they were gasoline on the fire of her grief. Her sorrow curdled instantly into a white-hot, monumental rage. It was the fury of a betrayed mother, but it was more than that. It was the fury of a goddess whose most sacred trust had been shattered. Betrayed by Hades, who had stolen her joy. And betrayed, most cruelly, by her own brother Zeus, the father of her child, who had not only permitted the theft but had orchestrated it. In that moment, Demeter's connection to her divine family was severed. She forsook Olympus. She would not sit among the liars and conspirators who had bartered her daughter's happiness for political stability. She descended to earth once more. But this time, she veiled her divine nature entirely. She took on the guise of an old woman, her back bent, her face etched with the deep lines of a mortal life filled with sorrow. She called herself Doso, a refugee of fate, a woman broken by pirates and loss, searching for work. Her own grief had become her disguise. Her aimless wanderings eventually brought her to the city of Eleusis, ruled by King Celeus. She sat by a public well, the Maiden Well, a picture of profound desolation, wrapped in her sorrow. It was here that the kind daughters of the king found her. Taking pity on the frail, grieving old woman, they invited her back to the palace, offering her the position of nurse to their infant brother, the long-awaited heir Demophon. Within the palace walls, Demeter's immense divine power could not be entirely suppressed. As she crossed the threshold, her head brushed the high ceiling, and for a fleeting instant, a divine, golden light filled the room, stunning the royal family into awe. Queen Metanira, the baby's mother, offered her a throne of honor. But the grieving goddess, still lost in her pain, refused. She sat instead on a humble, low stool, a picture of humility and sorrow. She would not drink their celebratory wine, accepting only a simple drink of barley water, and crushed min, the Kykiona potion of mourning. Yet, in the infant Demophon, Demeter found a flicker of purpose. In this fragile mortal child, she saw a chance to defy the cruel finality that had claimed her own daughter. She decided to cheat death itself. She would make this mortal boy a god. By day, she secretly anointed his small body with ambrosia, the food of the gods, making him strong and vital. And by night, in the secrecy of the great hall, she would perform a terrifying ritual. She would hold the baby in the heart of the hearth fire, the flames licking at his mortal flesh, burning away his human frailties, forging him into an immortal. The child thrived under her strange care, growing at a miraculous rate. But Queen Metanira, her maternal instincts mixed with suspicion, decided to spy on this mysterious nurse. One night, she crept into the hall and witnessed the horrifying sight of Demeter placing her beloved son into the roaring fire. A scream of pure maternal terror shattered the night and broke the spell. Enraged, Demeter snatched the child from the flames. The disguise of the old woman Doso fell away, and her true divine form was revealed. She stood magnificent and terrifying, her body radiating a blinding light that filled the great hall. Her voice was no longer that of a frail woman, but the thunder of the earth itself. "Foolish, ignorant mortals," she boomed, her voice echoing with primordial power. "Your fear has undone my great work. I would have made your son immortal and ageless, a god among men. Now he must face the frailty and death that is the fate of all your kind. But you shall have honor, for I am the great mother Demeter. You will build me a great temple and a mighty altar here in Eleusis. And I myself will teach you my sacred rites so that by performing them rightly you may yet win my favor." The people of Eleusis, terrified and awestruck, immediately began construction. But even as the grand temple rose in her honor, it brought no comfort to the goddess. She sealed herself within its walls, a solitary figure of grief, turning her back on both mortals and gods. And from her temple sanctuary, she unleashed her ultimate weapon. She made a terrible, unshakable vow. Not a single seed would be allowed to sprout from the soil. Not one blade of grass would grow. Not one ear of corn would ripen until her daughter, her stolen Kore, was returned to her. Her personal tragedy had now become a global catastrophe. She had put the entire world on strike. The earth became a barren wasteland. The oxen pulled plows through sterile dust. Famine, gaunt and relentless, stalked the land of mortals. Prayers turned into desperate cries, and the smoke from sacrificial altars, meant to appease the gods, rose from pyres with nothing left to burn. The age of gold had ended. Demeter had brought forth the first winter, born not of cold, but of a mother's broken heart. From his celestial throne, Zeus, king of the gods and orchestrator of the cosmic order, watched the world wither. The once green tapestry of the earth, woven by Demeter's own hand, was now a uniform, desolate shroud of brown and gray. The rivers that had once teemed with life ran low and sluggish, their banks cracked and dry. The air itself grew thin and cold, devoid of the scent of blossoms or the hum of insects. A terrible silence was falling over the mortal realm, the silence of starvation. This was not what he had intended. His calculated act of diplomacy, the strategic marriage meant to consolidate the power of the three brother kings, had backfired with catastrophic consequences. The very foundation of the Olympian order was trembling. For what is a pantheon of gods without the mortals who worship them? Their prayers, their festivals, their sacrifices, these were the currency of divine relevance. And now humanity was on the brink of complete annihilation, their desperate pleas rising to the heavens as hollow whispers. Zeus's authority was being challenged, not by a rival god or a rampaging titan, but by the unyielding, earth-shattering grief of a single mother. He was trapped between his unbreakable oath to Hades and the impending death of the world. He had to intervene. His first attempt was one of simple command. He summoned Iris, the personification of the rainbow, she who moves with the speed of light and carries the decrees of the gods. Iris, radiant and swift, delivered the will of Zeus. She spoke of his command for Demeter to cease her destructive mourning, to release the earth from its frozen grip, and to rejoin the company of the gods on Olympus. She offered promises of honor and restitution, but Demeter did not stir. She did not even deign to look at the messenger. Her heart was a stone of winter, deaf to threats and promises alike. Her silence was a more powerful refusal than any shouted defiance. Iris, her rainbow colors seeming to dim in the face of such absolute sorrow, returned to Olympus, her mission a failure. Frustrated, Zeus escalated his efforts. If a command would not work, perhaps the combined influence of the entire pantheon would. He dispatched a grand procession of the greatest Olympian gods, a delegation of unparalleled power and prestige. One by one and then in groups, they descended to the temple at Eleusis. They pleaded. They cajoled. They reasoned. They appealed to her sense of duty, to her love for humanity, to her role in the cosmic balance. They laid before her feet gifts of unimaginable worth, treasures forged in the heart of divine fires. They promised her new honors, greater temples, a status unparalleled among the goddesses. They tried every tactic known to the divine mind, logic, bribery, flattery, and veiled threats. But Demeter's resolve was as unshakable as the mountains. To each god, her answer was the same, her voice low and devoid of emotion, yet carrying the unbreakable weight of her vow. I will not set foot on Olympus, she declared. And not a single seed shall sprout from the cold earth until I see my daughter, my Kore, with my own two eyes. The procession of gods returned to Olympus, their heads bowed in failure. Their combined power had proven utterly useless against the force of a mother's love. The famine below intensified. The world was teetering on the brink of an eternal, lifeless winter. Zeus, the mighty king of gods, was cornered. His grand political scheme had brought the world to its knees. He could not break his sacred, sworn oath to his brother Hades, a vow that held the cosmos together. But he could not allow that same cosmos to perish. He had one final gambit. One last card to play. It was not a card of power but of persuasion. Not a warrior but a diplomat. A god who could walk the paths between worlds, whose nature was to move through boundaries, a being at home in the light of Olympus, the world of men, and even the shadows of the underworld. He summoned Hermes, the quick-witted, silver-tongued god of travelers, merchants, messengers, and thieves. The divine psychopomp whose duty it was to guide souls to their final rest. He was the only one who could enter the kingdom of the dead and hope to leave it again without consequence. His winged sandals could outpace any guardian. His golden herald staff, the caduceus, could charm the most stubborn will. Go, my son, Zeus commanded, his voice heavy with the weight of the dying world. Leave the halls of Olympus. Plunge down through the hidden ways of the earth to the dark house of Hades. Find your uncle. And use your famous eloquence, that clever tongue that has gotten you out of so much trouble. Persuade the Lord of the Dead. Convince him to release the maiden Persephone from the gloom and send her back into the light of day. Do this, so her mother may finally see her, and lay aside the anger that is killing the world. With a sharp nod, Hermes accepted the mission. The fate of existence now rested not on a clash of titans, but on a delicate negotiation in the darkest corner of the cosmos. He secured his winged sandals, took up his golden staff, and launched himself from the peak of Olympus. He flew past the desperate gods, leaving the fading light of his home behind, and plunged downwards, a single brilliant star falling into the abyss. He had to succeed where all others had failed. He had to bring spring back from the land of the dead. While the world above withered under a mother's fury, a profound and silent transformation was taking place in the world below. To understand what Persephone would become, we must leave the desperate gods and the grieving mother behind for a moment. We must descend with Hermes, past the gates of twilight, and into the very heart of the kingdom of Hades. Forget the images of fire and eternal torment that later ages would paint. The Hellenic underworld was a realm of solemn grandeur, a place of immense scale and profound quiet. Imagine vast, cathedral-like caverns whose ceilings are lost in an impenetrable starless shadow. Imagine silent, gray rivers of mist snaking through the landscape, the Styx, river of unbreakable oaths, the Acheron river of pain, the Lethe River of Forgetfulness. Picture endless, ghostly fields of asphodel, their pale spectral blossoms nodding in a breeze that never blows. This was a kingdom of perpetual twilight, ruled by a silence broken only by the faint, dry rustle of the shades of the dead as they flitted through the gloom, whispering memories of the sun. And at the center of this immense, silent domain, in a great hall of black volcanic rock polished to a mirror sheen, stood two thrones. One of imposing ebony belonged to the grim king, but the other, a throne of dark silver and obsidian, was no longer empty. On it sat a new figure. She was no longer just Kore, the trembling, terrified maiden who had been dragged screaming into the abyss. Months had passed in the timeless dark. The initial shock, the raw terror, the desperate cries for her mother, these had slowly subsided, like a storm passing over a vast ocean, leaving behind a deep and abiding melancholy. But within that sorrow, something new and resilient had begun to take root. The frightened maiden was beginning to forge a queen. She was becoming Persephone. Hades, for his part, had proven to be a far more complex figure than a simple brutish captor. He had not stolen a slave, he had sought a queen. He did not chain her in a lightless dungeon. He placed her on a throne at his own right hand, a position of ultimate honor and power in his realm. He treated her not with cruelty, but with a strange, grim, and solemn respect. He was a lonely king who had finally found a companion worthy of sharing his vast domain. He showed her the secrets of his kingdom. He led her through caverns where veins of raw gold glittered like trapped lightning in the rock. He revealed vaults where diamonds, emeralds, and sapphires lay in heaps, their fiery brilliance a stark contrast to the gloom. He explained that all the wealth of the upper world, every mineral and precious metal that mortals coveted, had its roots here in his dark soil. He was not just the king of the dead, he was the king of all the earth's hidden treasures. His name, Hades, meant the unseen, but another of his titles was Platon, the wealthy. He was offering her not just a crown, but the keys to an empire of unimaginable riches. Most importantly, he introduced her to her subjects, the countless, silent, flitting souls of all who had ever lived. She saw the shades of great heroes, their ethereal forms still carrying a faint echo of their former glory. She saw the shades of kings and queens now equal to the humble farmers and artisans who shuffled past them. In this kingdom, all were equalized by the finality of death. Persephone, in her silent grief for the son she had lost, began to truly see. She watched the intricate workings of this vast, bureaucratic kingdom of the end. She saw the three stern judges of the dead Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iacusa as they weighed the lives of the newly arrived. She saw the gnarled, ancient ferryman Charon pulling his skiff across the river Styx, his price always a single coin. And she learned to look upon the great, three-headed hound Cerberus not as a monster, but as a fiercely loyal guardian, the unbreachable defense of her new home. She was isolated from the world of life, a pain that was a constant, dull ache in her heart. But here in the darkness she discovered she was not powerless. The shades of the dead, who shuffled past the imposing throne of Hades with averted eyes, would sometimes risk a glance at her. At their new queen. In her, they saw something they had all lost, a memory of the sun. She who had known life so vibrantly was now one of them, their sovereign. A strange, silent bond began to form between the queen and her subjects of shadow. This was the scene that greeted Hermes as his winged sandals touched down silently on the floor of the great hall. He saw the dark, formidable king on his ebony throne, and beside him, no longer a wilting flower, but a sorrowful, yet undeniably regal queen, draped in shadow and authority. The messenger god, his voice echoing slightly in the immense chamber, delivered the decree of Zeus. He spoke with all his famed eloquence, painting a vivid picture of the catastrophe unfolding in the world above. He described Demeter's all-consuming grief, her terrible vow, and the dying world. He spoke of the famine, the silent altars, the threat to the cosmic order that affected all three realms. He framed the request not as a demand from a superior king, but as a logical, necessary plea for balance and the survival of all. Hades listened, his face an unreadable mask of stone. His gaze was fixed not on Hermes, but on Persephone. To give her up the very thought was a fresh wound in his ancient, lonely heart. She was the one source of light, however muted, in his eternal gloom. The one living thing in his land of the dead. But he was also a king who understood structure, law, and consequence. He knew that the complete annihilation of the mortal world would ultimately unravel his own kingdom. If there are no living, there can be no dead. His realm would cease to grow, its purpose would end. The cosmic order demanded a sacrifice. He looked at Persephone. As Hermes spoke of returning to the light, a breathtaking, almost painful hope had ignited in her eyes. The thought of seeing her mother again, of feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin, of breathing air thick with the scent of flowers, it was an ecstasy so powerful it was nearly unbearable. The queen's composure momentarily fractured, revealing the lost maiden beneath. A faint, knowing and perhaps tragic smile touched the lips of the Lord of the Dead. He would obey the decree of his brother. He would avert the crisis. He would allow his queen to return to the world above. "You may go, Persephone," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from the very rock of the hall. "Go to your mother. End her great sorrow and let the earth live again." Persephone's heart soared. It was true. It was over. She was free to go home. She rose from her throne, ready to follow Hermes into the light. But the king of the underworld was a master of his own dark domain, and its laws were as subtle as they were binding. His acquiescence was not a surrender. It came with a quiet gesture, a final act of hospitality that was, in truth, an inescapable trap. The journey back was seconds away. Freedom was a palpable presence in the air, a scent of sunlight and fresh rain amidst the dust and gloom of the underworld. Persephone stood on the precipice of her release, her entire being straining towards the world above, towards her mother's embrace. It was in this moment of overwhelming relief and unguarded joy that Hades, the silent king, made his final, fateful move. It was not a command, not a threat, but a gesture of quiet, almost tender concern. "Before you depart, my queen," he said, his voice a low resonant rumble that held no discernible trace of malice. "The journey is long. You have been weakened by your long sorrow and have taken no sustenance. You must eat something, lest you faint and falter before you reach your mother." He extended his hand, and in his palm lay not a feast, not a banquet of the dead, but a single unassuming fruit, a pomegranate. Here in this simple offering lies the very axis on which the myth of Persephone turns. This single moment is shrouded in a profound and powerful ambiguity, and within that ambiguity lies the key to her entire transformation from maiden to sovereign. For was this an act of deception, or was it an act of acceptance? The oldest and simplest telling of the tale paints Hades as a master of cunning. In this version, he is the sly manipulator, exploiting Persephone's innocence and her desperate eagerness to leave. He offers the fruit as a seemingly kind gesture, knowing full well that she is ignorant of the ancient, unbreakable law of his realm. He tricks her with a husband's gentle persuasion into sealing her own fate, ensuring that his victory is not entirely undone by Zeus's decree. But there are other, more complex and compelling interpretations. Let us consider the queen who had been taking shape in the gloom. This was no longer the naive Kore who had chased a flower. Months had passed in the silent, watchful dark. She had sat on a throne of power. She had learned the geography of her kingdom, its rules, its rhythms, its very nature. Is it truly possible that the Queen of the Dead was unaware of the most fundamental law of the dead? Perhaps in that charged moment, Persephone made a conscious choice. A choice that was hers and hers alone. Why would she do it? Why would she eat the food that would bind her to the darkness forever? The reasons are a mystery buried in the heart of the myth, but we can speculate. Perhaps it was a small, subtle act of rebellion against the overbearing, all-consuming love of her mother, a love that had sought to keep her a perpetual child. A way of declaring that she could no longer return to being simply the maiden of the meadows. Or perhaps it was a gesture of something more complex towards the lonely king who sat beside her. Pity? Understanding? Or even a strange, burgeoning affection for the one being who had not treated her as a child, but as an equal, offering her not a playground, but a throne. An acknowledgement of the power and dominion he had shared with her. Or maybe, and this is the most powerful interpretation, it was a deliberate act of self-definition. A moment of ultimate agency. Persephone may have understood that she could not erase her trauma. She could not unlive her time in the underworld. To simply flee back to the light would be to deny a fundamental part of who she had now become. By eating the seeds, she was not surrendering. She was integrating. She was consciously choosing to weave the darkness into the tapestry of her own being. She was claiming her new dual identity. She was choosing to become the bridge between two worlds, not merely a fleeting visitor to one. She was choosing power. The ancient, primordial law was absolute and inescapable. Whoever consumes the food of the underworld is forever bound to it. To eat in the realm of the dead is to perform a sacrament. It is an act of communion, a binding contract written not in ink but in substance. It is to accept the realm into yourself, and in doing so, become part of it forever. Whatever her motive, whether she was the tricked and innocent Kore or the knowing and choosing Persephone, the outcome was sealed. She took the fruit from his hand. She raised it to her lips. And she ate. The myths differ on the number. Some say it was just 3 seeds. Others say 4 or perhaps 6. A small, seemingly insignificant number. But each seed was a metaphysical anchor, a weight of fate. Each one would represent a month of the year that she would be bound by law and by choice to her husband, her throne, and her kingdom in the dark. She swallowed the seeds of the pomegranate. And with that small, quiet, irreversible act, her destiny and the destiny of the world above was forever altered. She was no longer just Demeter's daughter, on temporary leave from the light. She was now, and for all time, the wife of Hades. She had accepted the crown. She was truly the queen of the underworld. Her choice made, her fate sealed. She followed Hermes to the golden chariot. This time she ascended not as a shrieking, terrified captive, but as a queen making a royal progress to her other domain. The black stallions galloped upwards, towards a pinpoint of light that grew ever larger. She rose from the depths of the earth, and the world above, ignorant of the subtle contract that had just been sealed, held its breath, waiting for the unconditional return of its long-lost spring. At her lonely vigil in the temple at Eleusis, Demeter felt it before she saw it. A tremor not of anger but of impending joy. A faint, almost imperceptible warmth that seemed to rise from the very stones of the earth. The frozen air stirred with a whisper of something new, a promise of life. She rushed from the temple doors, her gaze fixed on the horizon, her entire being alight with a hope she had not dared to feel for an eternity. and then she appeared. The earth, which had once opened to swallow her daughter, now parted gently to release her. Persephone emerged, rising from the ground as if she were the first flower after a long winter. She blinked in the bright, unfamiliar sunlight, her eyes, accustomed to the gloom, slowly adjusting to the world of color. She was no longer wearing the dark robes of her underworld kingdom, but a garment that seemed woven from the pale light of dawn. The reunion was not a simple embrace. It was a cosmic event, an explosion of love so powerful it healed the world. Demeter ran to her daughter, her grief-stricken form radiating a light that grew brighter with every step. She enveloped Persephone in an embrace that seemed to shake the foundations of the earth, a mother's love made manifest. And as she held her long-lost child, life, explosive and triumphant, surged back into the wounded world. The effect was instantaneous and miraculous. The cold, hard ground softened and darkened with moisture. Green shoots, tentative at first, then bold and confident, pushed through the sterile dust. The skeletal gray trees that had stood as monuments to Demeter's sorrow suddenly burst forth with leaves of 1,000 shades of vibrant green. Fields that were barren moments before erupted in a riot of color poppies, irises and crocuses blooming in a breathtaking wave. The air, once thin and cold, grew warm and fragrant with the rich scent of moist earth, fresh blossoms and life renewed. The rivers began to flow freely, and from the forests the birds, long silent, erupted into a symphony of song. Spring had returned, not gradually but in a single, glorious, overwhelming flood. Across the land, mortals who were on the brink of starvation stumbled from their homes, weeping with joy as they witnessed the miracle. The promise of a harvest of life itself had been reborn. But amidst the overwhelming joy of the reunion, as Demeter held her daughter's face in her hands, her sharp, divine eyes noticed something new. There was a depth in Persephone's gaze that had not been there before, a shadow of ancient knowledge, a quiet gravitas that spoke of thrones and silent kingdoms. The pure, untroubled innocence of Kore was gone, replaced by the complex wisdom of a queen. A terrible, cold suspicion began to creep into Demeter's heart, a chilling counterpoint to the warmth of her joy. "My child," she asked, her voice trembling slightly, attempting to hold on to the perfect happiness of the moment. "Tell me truly and hide nothing. Surely you have not tasted any food while you were in that land of darkness? Speak, for if you have not, you shall dwell with me here on Olympus. But if you have tasted, you must return to the hidden places of the earth." Persephone's joyful expression faltered. The light in her eyes dimmed. She could not lie to her mother, the great goddess of truth and the sacred earth. With a heavy heart, her gaze fell. She confessed. She told of Hades's gentle persuasion, of the beautiful dark red pomegranate, and of the sweet glistening seed she had willingly eaten. A cry of pure despair tore from Demeter's lips, a sound as piercing and full of anguish as her first cry of loss. And the world, which had just burst into triumphant life, seemed to hesitate. The light flickered. The breeze died. The blossoms trembled as if from a sudden frost. The goddess knew the ancient law. Her victory was incomplete. Her daughter was still bound to the underworld, to the dark king who had stolen her. Her rage, which had been soothed, began to smolder once more. The fragile piece of the world hung by a thread. Before Demeter's renewed fury could once again plunge the world into an eternal winter, a final ultimate intervention was made. This time it was not a messenger or a delegation of pleading gods. Zeus sent his own mother, the great Titaness Rhea, the grandmother of both Hades and Persephone. Rhea, the great mother of the gods, descended to Eleusis in a chariot drawn by lions. She came not with threats or commands, but with the gentle, irresistible logic of a primordial matriarch. She spoke to her distraught daughter Demeter not as a subject, but as a mother herself. She brokered a compromise, a new and lasting order for the cosmos that would honor all parties. The love of a mother, the authority of a husband, the will of Zeus, and the needs of the world. The pact was forged. Because Persephone had consumed the food of the dead, the ancient law could not be broken. She was bound to her husband and his kingdom, but neither would she be confined to the darkness forever. A balance would be struck, a rhythm established. The number of pomegranate seeds she had eaten, 3, or 4, or 6, depending on the telling, would determine the number of months she must spend below, reigning as the dread queen of the underworld by her husband's side. But for the remaining months of the year, she would be free to return to the world above, to ascend from the darkness and live with her mother in the glorious light of the sun. And so from this divine compromise, the seasons were born. When Persephone walks the earth, Demeter's heart is full of joy, and she blesses the world with her unrestrained benevolence. The sun shines warmly, the rains fall gently, the crops grow high, and life flourishes. These are the life-giving seasons of spring and summer. But when the appointed time comes and Persephone must honor the other half of her destiny, a great sorrow falls over her mother. As her daughter descends once more to her chthonic throne, Demeter mourns. She withdraws her favor from the earth, and her grief blankets the world. The leaves turn gold and crimson and fall from the trees. The air grows sharp and cold. The earth becomes hard and fallow, resting under a quiet blanket of frost and snow. These are the seasons of autumn and winter, a time of dormancy and memory, a world waiting patiently for its queen to return, for the queen of the dead to become, once more, the maiden of the spring. This was not just a story to the ancients. It was a profound, living explanation for the fundamental rhythm of their existence, the eternal, beautiful, and sometimes sorrowful cycle of life, death, and glorious rebirth. The story of Persephone, for many, concludes with the beautiful and elegant explanation for the seasons. It's a neat, satisfying resolution to a cosmic crisis. But to stop there is to miss the most crucial, the most powerful part of her evolution. To stop there is to leave her forever as a divided figure, a pawn in a game played by her mother and her husband. It is to misunderstand the very nature of her transformation. The abduction was not the end of her story. It was the violent, fiery crucible in which her true power was forged. Her time in the underworld was not a recurring prison sentence. It was the foundation of her reign. In the sunless depths, she was not a pining captive counting the days. She became what Hades had intended her to be, its queen. And not merely in name, not as a decorative consort. She ruled. The ancient Greeks, when speaking of her in her chthonic aspect, often avoided her true name. To speak it was to invite the attention of the grave. Instead, they used epithets, titles spoken with a mixture of profound reverence and holy fear. She was Despoina, the mistress, a title of absolute authority. She was Hagni, the pure or the holy one, implying a power that was sacred and untouchable. And sometimes she was invoked as Persephone, a name that echoes with the sound of destruction, hinting at a power far more formidable and terrifying than that of a simple spring maiden. She was, in every sense, the dread queen. Her unique, dual nature gave her an unparalleled authority. Having lived in both the brilliant light and the profound dark, she alone understood the full spectrum of existence. She was the perfect bridge, the ultimate mediator between two realities that mortals could never reconcile. For the silent shades of the dead, she was a ruler who still carried the memory of sunlight in her soul, who understood their longing for a world they had lost. And for the living, a rare, bold heroes or desperate lovers who dared to trespass in her domain, she was a sovereign whose judgment was as stern, as final, and as unyielding as her husband's. We truly see her power, her character, and her agency not in her own origin myth, but in the stories of those who came after, those who journeyed into her kingdom and had to face her on her own terms. Consider the tale of Orpheus, the musician of divine talent. When Orpheus descended to the underworld to beg for the return of his beloved, he played a song of such transcendent, heartbreaking beauty that it halted the functions of the entire realm. The eternal torments of the damned paused. The Furies, merciless spirits of vengeance, were seen to weep iron tears. The great wheel of Ixion stood still. The texts say that the king and queen were moved. And while Hades, the grim king, was certainly swayed by this unprecedented disruption of his rigid order, many classical scholars believe the true emotional catalyst was Persephone. She who had been torn from her own loving mother, she who knew the sharp, violent pain of separation, would have understood the musician's grief in a way her husband never could. It was her own story, sung back to her in a different key. It was likely her compassion, her empathy born of shared trauma, that truly granted Orpheus his impossible request. Albeit with its famously tragic condition, he must not look back. She understood the pain of the one who is taken, and in Orpheus, she saw the pain of the one left behind. But her compassion had its limits. It was balanced by a fierce, implacable sense of justice and a contempt for arrogance. When the boastful hero Pirithous and his companion, the great king Theseus of Athens, descended on an expedition of supreme hubris, their goal, to abduct Persephone herself and make her Pirithous' bride, they were met not with a frightened maiden, but with the cold, unblinking fury of a queen. She would not be a prize to be stolen twice. Hades and Persephone greeted them with a chilling display of false hospitality. They feigned to hear their petition and invited the arrogant heroes to sit and feast with them. But the very moment the heroes sat upon the stone seats offered to them, they found they could not rise. The chairs were enchanted, the chairs of forgetfulness, and the heroes became magically bound to the living rock of the underworld, trapped for eternity in the very kingdom they sought to conquer. It was a punishment of perfect, poetic irony, a clear demonstration that Persephone was no longer a victim of abduction, but a ruler who punished such violations with terrifying finality. Perhaps the most telling story of her evolved status is her conflict with none other than Aphrodite, the formidable Olympian goddess of love, over the handsome mortal Adonis. When Adonis was tragically killed by a boar, his soul descended to the underworld. But Aphrodite, his divine lover, refused to let him go. Persephone, now queen of his new domain, also claimed him, captivated by his beauty. The dispute between the two powerful goddesses became so fierce it required the judgment of Zeus himself. Wisely refusing to choose between the queen of the underworld and the goddess of love, Zeus delegated the decision. The verdict, delivered by the muse Calliope, was a perfect reflection of Persephone's own life, a compromise of divided time. Adonis would spend 1/3 of the year with Aphrodite, 1/3 of the year with Persephone in her kingdom, and the final third on his own. Consider the significance of this. Here, Persephone is not a grieving daughter or a passive queen. She is an active claimant, a rival to a great Olympian goddess, fighting for what she desires. And the outcome places her on equal footing. The underworld is no longer a lesser realm, but a kingdom with rights and powers that even the Olympians must respect. From a frightened girl in a field of flowers, She had become a complex, formidable, and deeply respected sovereign. She was the silent partner in the underworld's power couple, her wisdom and empathy balancing Hades's grim, unyielding authority. She was the gatekeeper. She was the first face the dead would see. She was Despoina. She was Hagni. She was the dread queen Persephone. The story of Persephone is far more than a simple myth explaining the turning of the seasons. It is a foundational philosophy, a profound spiritual narrative whose echoes have resonated through Western consciousness for millennia. Her journey from Kore to Persephone, from the sunlit meadow to the throne of shadows and back again, became the sacred heart of one of the most important and secretive religious traditions of the entire ancient world, the Eleusinian Mysteries. For nearly 2,000 years at the very site where a grieving Demeter had commanded her temple be built, initiates from every corner of the Greek-speaking world, from slaves and commoners to great philosophers like Plato and emperors like Marcus Aurelius Wald, gathered to participate in these sacred rites. The precise details of what occurred during the 9-day ritual were the most closely guarded secret of antiquity. To reveal them was a sacrilege punishable by death, a secret so well kept that we can only piece it together from fragments and testimonies today. But we know its core purpose. The initiates would ritually reenact Demeter's desperate search, her profound grief, and the ultimate, joyous reunion with her daughter. They drank the Kikian, the same barley and mint drink Demeter consumed in her sorrow. They journeyed in a torchlit procession just as she had. By participating in this divine drama, they were offered something extraordinary. Not the promise of immortality, not an escape from death, but something far more profound for the mortal soul, the promise of a blessed and happy existence after death. Think of the beautiful, powerful paradox at the heart of this belief. It was Persephone, the dread queen of the dead, who became the ultimate symbol of hope for the living. It was her journey into the abyss that gave mortals a path to a better afterlife. Because she had crossed the ultimate threshold and returned, she embodied the radical possibility that death was not a grim, absolute end. It was instead another stage in a grander, sacred cycle. She, who was the very essence of spring, had brought the promise of rebirth into the very heart of the land of the dead. She taught humanity not how to conquer death, but how to face it without fear. Her symbolism, born from this epic tale, is woven deeply into the fabric of Western culture. The pomegranate, the fateful fruit that sealed her destiny, becomes a perfect symbol of her dual nature. Its tough, leathery skin is like a tomb, but when broken open, it reveals a treasure of countless seeds, a symbol of life, fertility, and abundance hidden within the darkness. It is life contained within death. The torch, carried by Demeter in her desperate search and by Hecate as a guide between worlds, becomes a timeless emblem for the light of knowledge, of hope, and of consciousness itself, the light that can guide us through our own personal underworlds, our own darkest nights of the soul. But Persephone's most enduring and universal legacy is her own personal transformation. Her story, when stripped to its archetypal core, is not one of victimhood. It is one of the most powerful tales of resilience ever told. It is a map for the human psyche. It is the story of confronting an unspeakable trauma, of being dragged into the underworld of our own being, our fears, our sorrows, our limitations, our shadows. Her myth teaches us that one cannot run from the darkness or pretend it doesn't exist. True strength, true wisdom, comes from integrating that darkness, rather than being destroyed by it. We do not emerge from such journeys unchanged. We are not meant to. We emerge like Persephone with a deeper wisdom, a new authority, and a more complete, more authentic understanding of who we are. She is the archetype of the survivor who becomes a sovereign. And in doing so, she resolves the great paradox that opened our story. Life and death are not opposites locked in an eternal war. Persephone teaches us that they are partners in a sacred dance. They are intertwined, each giving the other meaning. The fallow, frozen silence of winter is necessary for the explosive, vibrant life of spring. The quiet contemplation of our own mortality is what gives our brief, sunlit lives their preciousness, their urgency, and their beauty. She is the queen of the dead who embodied life because she alone lived in the full, unblinking truth of both. She brought the memory of flowers to the land of shades, and she brought the wisdom of the grave back to the world of the living. She is not a goddess of a single season, but the master of the entire, eternal cycle. In her story, we find the profound and deeply comforting promise that even after the longest, coldest, and darkest of winters, spring will always, eventually, and gloriously return. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of myth. The tale of Persephone reminds us that power can be found in the most unexpected places, and that even in the deepest darkness, the seeds of life remain. If you found this exploration of ancient lore compelling, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and ringing the notification bell so you never miss a new story from the annals of history and mythology. Who is the god, goddess, or hero whose story you want to see explained next? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, may you find the light in your own darkness.